Genau. Well, I will start. Thank you all for joining us, and welcome to the presentation that Benjamin and I are giving today. We would like to talk about Shopware 6 performance and how we identified Shopware 6 performance problems with Tideways. Yes. What's our agenda today? First, I'd like to talk about my company and introduce myself, and then talk about the experience we've had with Shopware 6 and the migration to it. And then Benjamin goes into detail and talks about how he was able to identify the bottlenecks with Tideways in our case. I'll start with the introduction. I'm Paul and 19 years old and have been working for over 2 years now in the family business of Radonline.de, and my responsibilities are in the IT and marketing area. And in the last few months, I've been working intensively with Shopware 6. Can you go back?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Radonline.de is an online retailer for bicycles and accessoires, and it used Magento 1 since 2010 when it was launched. And we also have a retail store in Germany. Yes. Now the next. Thank you. What led to this presentation that Benjamin and I are giving today? As I said, Radonline.de used Magento 1. And in 2020, Radonline.de and many other Magento 1 stores had the problem that the support for Magento 1 expired. So we had to make a decision. Do we continue to rely on Magento 1 or do we switch? And if we switch to a new system, which one? The decision was then made for Shopware 6. And yeah, because it's rather simple and it's based on modern technology, and we also like the API first approach. Yeah. How did the migration proceed? In 2020, I was involved in web development anyway and was learning PHP at the moment. So I was given the task of migration. And to migrate this shop quickly, I started to design the theme for the front end, which was quite easy because it was well documented by Shopware. And I also installed the necessary plugins for payment, like PayPal or Amazon Pay, an SEO plugin, and the tracking plugin for Google Analytics for the enhanced e-commerce tracking. Yes, and of course, we also had to connect the Shopware 6 to our other system, like the ERP system we are using and the PIM system. But these interfaces already existed or were newly developed. And in summary, I can say that the migration to Shopware was very uncomplicated. So what is the situation we're at the moment with Radonline.de and Shopware 6? Well, we were able to migrate successfully at the beginning of the year. Since then, the conversion rate has more than doubled due to the migration. And in addition, we have a more modern shop, which is easy to develop. And we were able to reduce development costs. But on the other hand, there are some problems. For example, the importing via API. The imports were very slow. For example, it took 22 seconds to update only the stock of one product. And you can imagine what it's like when you have to update 15,000 products. Yeah. And in addition, the product export from Shopware sometimes did not work, which is very bad for like Google Shopping campaigns. For example, if you run a Google Shopping campaign with old data and promote products that are already out of stock, you're losing money. And often this export took more than 10 minutes for only a few fields to export. And sometimes the whole export just failed. Yeah. And we also didn't like the performance on the front end. The time to first byte was too high in our opinion. It was more near 1 second than below 500 milliseconds. Yes, the next thing. Well, what did we do to identify the problems? We realized quite quickly that we could not solve the problems on our own. So we approached Benjamin Eberlei and Fabian Blechschmidt. And with the help of Tideways, we were able to identify the causes of the problems. And we have already solved some of them. And I'll now hand over to Benjamin, who will go into more detail.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm Benjamin, and I'm the founder of Tideways, and we do performance monitoring and profiling for PHP applications and also for Shopware. So when Fabian and Paul approached me with the Radonline shop, so the problems that Paul mentioned sounded like something that a few of our customers also had before. So what is sort of the approach that we recommend, or what we use or tell our customers to do, is that to find out more about your performance and sort of set up a cycle of optimizing the performance, we recommend to use monitoring for different kinds of pages, page types and tasks. Like pages are like product detail pages, category page, all the different page types that you can identify. And then also tasks like product export or import, what Paul mentioned, like the connection between the ERP system and the shop system, in a way where you can monitor the overall performance of the system. So you can say, let's say, like Paul said, it takes about 22 seconds to import a product, or it takes 10 minutes to export the products to Google Shopping. Armed with this data, you're sort of able to identify what operations have the highest impact performance-wise on your users or on your system. And also with monitoring in place, you can assess when the footprint of the different pages change. So shop systems are always in flux. There's always a new plugin version, a new Shopware version, or a third-party service that is getting slower or faster. So it's always good to have this monitoring in place to sort of get a feeling of the pulse of the performance. When you're at that place, that you have this kind of monitoring data, then you can go into the data in much more detail using a profiler. And that means you collect the performance of individual functions, database queries, and everything that is happening for specific page types, for example. Then you can go analyze them. If you found a problem, you can try to fix them. In case of shop systems, fixing the performance problem often means that you have to notify a plugin author, or you have to communicate with the Shopware core team about specific things that can be optimized in these parts of the application. Because for a Shopware shop, often a lot of the code that is executed is not actually written by yourself, but it's already provided to you by external parties like Shopware, like a plugin author. So you sort of start this cycle of communicating with them or suggesting fixes to them to improve the performance. And this is what we did here with together with Radonline. And then you sort of repeat this cycle to get better and better. So what did we find for this specific case? So first, I want to talk about Shopware performance in general, sort of give you a baseline that you can get some rough numbers about what we see in our customers and their Shopware performance. And then I'll be going into 3 stories specific to the Radonline shop, what we optimized, covering all the 3 points that Paul mentioned: the product import, the product export, and the time to first byte of the shop. So first, I want to talk about Shopware performance in general. So Shopware essentially is a shop system that is pluggable, so you can install a lot of plugins, themes, and everything like this. What does this mean is that whenever you install something new into the system, it has the potential to impact the performance negatively. And what we looked at is all the customers that are using Shopware 6. We looked at them individually, which customer sort of has the quickest category page using the 95 percentile. 95 percentile means the performance, only 5% of requests are slower than this. And 95% of requests are faster than this number. So the customer that had the lowest 95 percentile using Shopware 6 in the last 7 days had a category page that responded in 650 milliseconds. And then the customer with the highest 95 percentile had a response time around 5 seconds, 900 milliseconds. So you can see there's almost a 10 times difference in the performance. And so this depends a lot on a lot of factors. So the customer could have a lot more products. The customer could have a lot more plugins installed. They could have bad hardware. But there are many reasons, obviously, but you can see there's like a very wide range in the performance that is possible using a system like Shopware. So it's important to optimize and look at what is actually causing the performance to drop. And like Paul said, you will want to target a performance around 500 milliseconds. That is often not possible. It should at least be under 1 second. For product, we also see a performance for the fastest around 700 and the highest around 2 seconds. One question we often get is, okay, we don't care about the performance of those pages. We just enable the HTTP cache in front. And if we do that, then we can see the performance in Shopware to drop to 50 milliseconds for pages that are cached. So it can be quite fast. However, the HTTP cache, you need to know what is the cache hit ratio. So how many pages are actually cached. And in many shops, this number of the pages that are cached versus uncached is very low. So it can start at as low as 10%. It goes up to 30%. And for a lot of shops that are better, it's around 70%. So what does it mean? Like 1 in 3 pages of a single user is uncached. And if the performance for this request is very slow in the ranges of, for example, 5 to 10 seconds, then this user will have a very bad experience. So it's important to also have a good performance for the uncached pages. So when we looked at the Radonline shop, this is a Shopware 6.3 shop. It's still running on Shopware 6.3. We identified a few problems using the Tideways Profiler that pointed towards the Shopware core being slow. And one of the functionalities in Shopware that is slower in version 6.3 and lower is the internal caching API. However, this was optimized in version 6.4, which was released a few weeks ago, and is now much, much faster. So we found this performance problem, and we saw that it was already fixed in Shopware. And in Tideways, this will look like this. So what can you see here? This is a screenshot of the profiler, and we are comparing 2 call graphs with each other. On the top, we see the base profile, which is for the controller that is exporting products. So what we did here in Tideways, we enabled the profiler for this controller to be activated for an hour and collect call graph information for that hour. And then we just waited a few times until Google sort of fetched the shopping data, and we got call graph information. And as Paul mentioned, the response of this was very low. It was 7 minutes to generate this output file, sometimes up to 10 minutes. And when we looked at the call graph, we found out that Shopware used an inefficient data structure in core, which was fixed in version 6.4. And it was using a function called array unique in PHP. It's a specific function that sort of optimizes or counts an array for number of occurrences. The details are not very important. However, what is important is that this is not a bottleneck you would usually sort of guess. It is something that when you write this code, you would not be expecting it to be slow. So you find a problem in code that the author was probably not thinking of when writing it. And you can only find out with real performance data that this is actually a problem. When we used the patch for Shopware 6.4 and sort of backported it to the Radonline shop, we saw a drop to 50 seconds of this request. You can see here that the array unique function is called 31,000 times less. And by doing so, 4 seconds of the request, 4 minutes of the request were shaved off the response time. So this was sort of our approach of fixing this. We didn't upgrade to 6.4 yet, but we backported this one specific performance patch to the Radonline shop. One benefit of this caching API improvement is that it's not only making the export of products much faster in Shopware, but it's a general performance fix that will make every page faster, because the caching API is a very central API in Shopware. So you will see at least 20 milliseconds, but probably around 50 milliseconds reduction in every request, just due to this optimization. So after we did this optimization in the core, we looked at the different other scenarios that Paul mentioned. So we now optimized the product export. We now wanted to look at the product import and the time to first byte. So we went to optimize the time to first byte. We looked at all the different pages. So we generated profiles for the homepage, the category page, the product page, all the different pages, and looked at them and tried to find the reasons why they seemed sluggish compared to a Shopware demo shop that is sort of doesn't have products, doesn't have plugins, and everything else. So what we did is that we used the Tideways Profiler to look at all the different events that Shopware is triggering and where plugins can hook into. And we identified a few plugins that are slow and are causing the performance to drop in every request. Specifically, we found one plugin called Cookie Consent. It's a cookie consent plugin. I guess everybody has to deal with it. And there are a lot of plugins in the plugin store that deal with this. And we found an accidental use of an uncached translation API. So it's really not a mistake that that everyone can make. And specifically with Shopware 6 being so new, and everybody is still sort of learning how the performance is affected by Shopware. This is something that like a tiny mistake that everybody could make. And it's also, if you look at the code, something you wouldn't expect to be slow if you use it. So we talked to the plugin authors and suggested a very simple patch, and they happily accepted it and already released a new version. And that will shave around 30 to 60 milliseconds of every request, which brings, in the case of Radonline, was about 10% of the total performance. So it dropped the performance quite a lot. How does it look like? If we look at this in a profiler, so we have sort of, on the right, you can see the call graph, and it's not fully readable, but you can see at the top, the first node is the dispatch function of Symfony, which is the event system of Symfony. and it triggers an event called kernel response. And we immediately see that as a reaction to this event being triggered, there's a function in this plugin here, acris cookie consent, which is quite slow, 40 milliseconds, which is something to look at. And we found the reason for this, as I told, was translations. We looked at the code. The translation at that point wasn't really necessary, so we dropped it. And then when we compared the performance again with our fix, we had 30 milliseconds one. Okay, so that is one thing we did for the time to first byte, reduce that by looking at sort of the events that are triggered. The performance improvement in Shopware core that 6.4 will be causing is also improving the performance. But since Radonline hasn't upgraded yet, it's not benefiting from it yet. We will see how that works out once they upgrade. And the last point that we want to look at in performance is the product import. And we also found that it was caused by a plugin, but Paul will tell the story here of how he identified and improved this on their end.
Yes, as I said before, it took the RP 22 seconds to update the stock of one product.
Sorry.
That means handling the request, indexing the product, and answering to the RP. And together with our ERP system, we changed the request to the RP and added another HTTP header, which tells Shopware to use the queue indexing. By that, the indexing is moved to an asynchronous process in the background, and it now only takes 2 seconds per product to handle the RP request. Of course, this does not solve the problem, but it covers it. So as a temporary solution, it's okay, because now the stocks are updated properly again. And in order to update or index the products, you should deactivate the admin worker, which is activated by default. And then you have to run a cron that executes messenger consume. And this should speed up the indexing for the updating process. Yes.
Yeah, so by sort of pushing the messages into the queue, at least the ERP system could send the updates to the backend, because previously it took so long that the ERP system could run into timeouts and things. So it's not very, it sort of can lead to problems if you respond very slowly to third-party APIs calling you. And that this sort of delayed or moved the problem to the message queue that could now process the slow updates in the backend. So what we then did is analyze, why is it actually so slow? And this is also something where when looking at profiling data, you find problems that you wouldn't expect, or the plugin author sort of wrote code without expecting this to be a problem. And this is it's a very common problem, because a shop system and all the plugins, they need to handle so many different shops that they cannot account for all the different usage patterns. And this makes it very hard to develop a plugin in a way that is always performant. And you need to rely on the feedback of the users to give you feedback back that specific parts with specific usage patterns are slow. So this is actually sort of a symbiotic relationship between shop authors and plugin authors, shop owners and people running the shops and running Shopware, running plugins, and those writing them. But it's very important to give feedback back and suggest improvement ideas. So what we found here is that due to some accidental sort of complexity in the plugin, it used the data access layer in a way where the data access layer accessing functions were called 400 million times, which is quite a lot. And obviously leads to performance problems. If you look at the code, you wouldn't expect it to be slow. We looked at the call graph. We found out the problem essentially. So this is not. We found out that it sort of depends on this usage of the database access layer. There's this filter by property function, and this is very, very slow. And we looked at why this is happening, and found that the code actually doesn't really look like it's being slow. So the code is using an array of cached categories. So that is nice. We only make the query once. And then it tries to find the category with a specific ID from this collection of categories. And this is what triggers sort of this small slow code. And looking at this, you wouldn't expect it. But the problem here really is with the shop that it had a lot of categories, and this API iterates over the categories over and over again and checks each of them for the category ID, which in the end causes this performance problem. So an improvement would be to rewrite this to be accessible by the key of the category in the array. And this would lead to a large improvement. But only if you test this with sort of the setup that has tons of categories, you would actually see this performance problem. And it needs to be a combination of things. So you could have 1,000 categories and only, let's say, a few sales channels or one sales channel with one language, and you wouldn't see this problem. But by the combination of different things, there's an explosion of this API being called and leading to this performance problem. So we also talked to the plugin authors here and suggested this as a fix, but we haven't been able to test this ourselves in production to see how this improves it. But we also expect that this is making a very, very huge difference. So what did we learn from looking at Shopware performance? So we learned that a lot of performance bottlenecks are unexpected code. We don't expect it to be a problem. We probably assume that the Shopware core authors and the plugin authors also don't expect it to be a performance problem. So it's always very important to look at your shop and identify the impact each plugin and each function of the core system has on the performance and how to optimize it. There's a question, isn't there a get key function in the entity collection that does that too? I don't know, maybe. I'm not sure if it's using the ID of the category as the key. Maybe it does, and then we can optimize it this way. I am not familiar enough with this, but maybe I can look at this, look at the API afterwards to see if that would solve it. Yeah. But again, this only proves the point that Shopware 6 is quite a new system. Everybody is scrambling to sort of port their plugins to Shopware 6 from Shopware 5 or other systems. And there's still a focus on features and getting everything working. And we as a development community still need to learn about the impact of individual APIs on performance, how to effectively use them. And that is something we need to learn together and help each other with to improve Shopware, improve the performance of plugins, and in the end, improve the performance of all the shops that are using Shopware. Okay, there's another question. Let me end the slide, and we can, I guess, do questions. So thank you very much for this talk. I wanted to end this with a small note of ourselves. We are currently looking for a developer advocate for Tideways. working on PHP performance, education and content. So if that's something you're interested in, check our page. If you want to contact me, you can send me an email. I forgot to add Paul's email here, I'm sorry. You can find him on the radonline.de website if you have questions to him. And yeah, if you have questions now, I guess we still have a few minutes to answer them. Let me look at the time.
We definitely do.
Okay.
We'll also have a breakout room as well for this talk. So if anyone wants to chat further to these guys, then they can at the end of all the talks as well.
Yeah.
Benjamin, would you like to take Christoph's question?
Yeah. So I will, I guess, answer the question that's in the chat. You told us that only a small percentage of Shopware pages is inside the HTTP cache. Did you check why this is such a small percentage and not more? Yeah. So the reason is that multiple reasons for this is that the cache gets cleared for various different reasons. And sort of like stock changes. So if you have a continuously running import, then changes in stock will invalidate the cache. And often plugins will accidentally invalidate the cache. And this is very hard to track. And then if you have a large shop, obviously the cache will only be active for, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes or something like this. The pages are really not visited that often, that they are always in the cache. So you might have a specific category that wasn't visited for an hour by any user. Then you have an uncached page. And this happens way more often with products, that a specific product wasn't looked at by somebody, and then the cache needs to be regenerated. So this is something that is just happening quite often because all the pages are not visited all the time.